Hey guys, hey everyone. My name is Aliaksei Kuncevič and welcome to Frontend Tech Show. As all you know, all the major gatherings are now online, so we have decided to try and use this format for our regular Frontend Tech meetup. For those of you who don't know what's Frontend Tech, is a regular meetup, happens every second month of every second Thursday at Microsoft Reactor in Sydney. There are two more cool people which involved into organizing this meetup, Vasil Baradak and Chris James. We are a very friendly meetup group, usually inviting speaking who talking about modern browsers and new APIs, web security, progressive web applications, and front-end frameworks, basically anything related to modern front-end development and modern web. And in case if you want to learn more about front-end frameworks, you can check out frontendwatch.com. This is our first online event, and we are planning to organize more events like that in the future. Especially, it's important during those days when everyone is working from home, working remote. And if you want to be a guest speaker at our meetup, just reach us out. We already scheduled another event for tomorrow, 10th of April, 3 p.m. Sydney time. So one of our guests is coming directly from Angular core team at Google. And you will learn all the latest news about the latest version of Angular. And also you will be able to ask any questions. We are pleased to have two awesome speakers today at our meetup. And basically, they come in from two different time zones, which is very interesting. So Matt, he's coming from US, and Stafford, he's coming from Sydney, Australia. So there is actually 17 hours difference right now. So, and just before we kicking off, I just want to make sure that, like, guys, if you see the stream is running, just comment anything, say hello or send an emoji or anything like that. Type the country or city where you're from, and also if you have any questions during the presentation, so just basically use that chat window and type Q colon your question and basically question mark, right? So this way we can see like and read your question. And also, if it's possible, I'm not sure if you guys can vote on questions, right? So then we can pick the most upvoted questions first. So that will help. So yeah, I think we are ready. So we're starting from the first presentation now. Then we have maybe like short Q&A session. We will pick 2-3 questions. Then we kick off the second talk, and after the second talk, we have like a long Q&A / panel discussion. Okay, I'm welcoming the first speaker on a stage, Stafford. He's gonna be talking about React and Redux. Actually, he's gonna be talking React hooks, which is like really a cutting-edge talk, I think, because React hooks was been recently introduced in the latest version of React. Not much people yet tried it out, I guess. But yeah, I think something you might be interested to hear. So yeah, all the details will be presented by Stafford, and I welcome Stafford on our stage, on our virtual stage, if you want.
Thanks, Aliaksei. I think I've just shared my screen. Coming up there. So thanks for Aliaksei for inviting me, and thanks everybody for coming to watch. I'll be talking about React and specifically the experience I had learning both hooks and Redux. You can check out other stuff that I do on my website, staffordwilliams.com. and you can check out my GitHub and my Twitter at Stafford below. So what we'll be doing over the next 30 minutes is discussing how I got here, and then looking into what challenges I had learning hooks in React and also Redux. So how did I get here? Well, it started some time ago, specifically 1995, with this application. This is Netscape Navigator 2.02, and it gave us two pretty fancy features, amongst others, and those features were animated GIFs and LiveScript, which was later renamed JavaScript. So if we just jump forward 11 years to 2006, this fellow came along. And this fellow, I stayed away from JavaScript for until jQuery came along. I messed around with it a little bit in Netscape Navigator and that kind of thing. But once jQuery came around, it allowed myself and others to be very, very lazy and not really understand how the language of JavaScript worked, but use jQuery to manipulate that DOM. And I think that many of you might be familiar with those times as well. In 2007, I started writing my first single-page application, and I used a framework called reactjs. That was back in a time where single-page applications were more like desktop applications retrofitted to the browser. So lots changed since then. I don't use reactjs so much anymore. 2009 came along, and it brought with it ASP.NET MVC. And this let me use the skills that I had learnt writing what I thought was JavaScript using jQuery, but also let me write the types of web applications that I wanted to. Prior to ASP.NET MVC, I was kind of making ASP.NET web forms, act in a MVC way, just sending JSON across the wire and that kind of thing, and rendering pages in the browser. So ASP.NET MVC was a pretty good fit for me, and I stuck with it for quite a while. In 2010, AngularJS came along, but I pretty much ignored it. In 2012, Durandal, I led a project for my employer that needed a pretty slick front end, and Durandal was popular in the Microsoft circles in 2012. It used Knockout and that kind of thing. Durandal's predecessor to Aurelia, or was created by the same creator as Aurelia. But I wasn't super confident with JavaScript at that time, so I actually hired a front-end developer to lead specifically the front-end part of that project. 2013 came along, and with it came React. I ignored it at that time. 2015 came along, and Redux came with it. I ignored Redux, and I ended up quitting my job and learned AngularJS about 5 years later after it had come out. I wrote AngularJS for 3 months straight, full-time. I really became much more confident in writing JavaScript, such that I decided to build a business that was based on JavaScript. And I spent a year building games in JavaScript and TypeScript, starting with Phaser and then eventually moving on to Pixie.js, which is a 2D renderer for the browser open source project. And I later joined the core team for that open source project as well. Unfortunately, I spent too much of my time working on open source software and making games rather than attempting to make my business make money. So I ended up running out of money, and I ended up getting a job as a software consultant for Redify, which is now Telstra Purple, which is where I currently am employed. With that came clients that demanded single-page applications again, and at that time, or by 2018, I picked up React. So I started using React late, maybe 2017, and again about 5 years later, after it had initially been launched. React, and let's for a moment talk about what React is. React is components and props at its very core, and that's pretty simple. Let's have a look at it. Here's a component. It's just a plain JavaScript function. It takes an object called props, and it returns JSX. There's differing opinions on JSX. Some people like it, some people don't. I like it. We can take that component that we had there, our pure JavaScript function there, and we can render an app. And here we are just reusing that function 3 times, passing those props through to it. So that's a super, super basic React component. And with that app, then I guess an application as well. To make the application a little bit more exciting, we need some state and some lifecycle in there. So what does that look like? Well, we take our tiny little component here and we pop it into this. So this is a little bit different. This is no longer a plain JavaScript function. This is, in fact, an ES6 class. We're extending from React component, and we've got a method in there called render. So importantly, this function here, or this component here, and this component here, is rendering the same thing. We're going to extend it a little bit more to get our state in there. We've thrown in a constructor. We are setting a property called state, and we're setting on a property called Malegi, a friend of mine. We're initializing that state, and in the bottom, we're referencing that state in our render. So let's talk about lifecycle. How do we mutate that state? How do we change that state? Here's a couple of lifecycle methods that come with React. Component did mount, component will unmount. One of those will be fired when the component mounts, and one of them will be fired, funnily enough, when the component unmounts. Let's have a look at how we would use those. For component did mount, I've got a little thing in here called something. That something could be an event, a meta, it could be a signaler, hub, anything that we can subscribe to our little topic here, for example, and supply a callback, which will end up manipulating our state. So here's our function here that's going to be triggered when we get this new person event, and we're going to set state. And that set state function there comes from our react.component here, and we can use that to update our state. When we look at component will unmount, we do the team player thing and we unsubscribe from what we had previously subscribed to. So it's a pub sub type thing. We're doing it with those 2 lifecycle methods. That's what it looks like as an overview. We've got that constructor in there. We've got those 2 lifecycle methods, and we've got that render. In 2019, hooks came along, and with hooks, came with React 16.8. I think it came out in about February of 2019. Interestingly, it is opt-in and non-breaking. So if you're already using a version of React past 16.8, guess what? You've got hooks, even though you're not using them. So you don't have to use them if you don't want to, but I hope that by the end of this talk, you'll have at least somewhat of a desire to use them. And there's a really great video. It's about an hour and a half long by Dan Abramov and friends, where they went over pretty much most of what React's hooks do for us. And it's about an hour and a half long, and I think that, yeah, you should definitely check that out. Very good video. I'm going to, however, go much, much quicker than an hour and a half. We're going to take a look at a couple of hooks that come with React. We're going to look at some of the rules, and we're going to look at what custom hooks let us do. So here's our component that we had, that minus those 2 life cycle methods, just for brevity. We're going to take that and we're going to switch it into this. Now, there's a couple of things that have occurred here. We have gone back to just using a plain old JavaScript function. We're using array destructuring to call or to save the results of calling this hook use state, what happens here is that we are initializing it with that value, and it's returning us two values. One is the name, which is going to be that state, and one is a function that we can call later to set that state. And then we're just referring to it just like that. So I just want to go back to that previous slide. This component and this component are doing the same thing. However, this component's got about 1, 2, 3, or close to 1,000 lines of code, and this one's only really about 2 lines of code. So hooks get me pretty excited just for having to write less amount of code. Let's have a look at what happens to those lifecycle methods. So component did mount is up the top there. And component will amount is at the bottom there. We're going to take those ones, we're going to flip them into this. So it's a little bit more complex than the use state was, but not really once you know what's happening. So let's break it apart. We're calling use effect here. Use effect is a hook that takes its first parameter is the code that's going to be called when the component mounts. It's going to return a function that will be executed when the component unmounts. And then this weird little empty array down here is called the dependency array. And I'll go into what that's going to do right now. So say you've got component did mount, and when we render that for the first time, we're setting the document title to what we have here, to a property on the in state called beers. Here's another component, lifecycle method called component did update, and this lifecycle method is going to be called every time either state or props in our component changes. So it's exactly the same code. Top one's just going to get called on component did mount. Second one's going to get called every time the state or props change. We might be a little bit more optimized with our component did update because maybe we don't want to update the DOM every single time. So here we've put a little bit of optimization in there to say actually only run that code if the state has actually changed, or the piece of state that we care about has actually changed. So when we take that and move it into a hook, it looks like this. So again, the same idea where we call use effect, that bit in the middle, document.title is the first bit that's going to get called. It would otherwise be called on every prop update and every state update as well. But here we can see what the dependency array is actually doing. We've put the value that we're using in here inside that dependency array. And what that means is two things. The code inside this, or this document title, is going to be set on the first mount, so the first time. And additionally, after that, it will never get called again if state and props change unless that value of beers change. So that allows us to give optimization, that same optimization that we were doing manually ourselves with comparison. Use effect is letting us do that with the dependency array. So what are the rules? The rules are very complex. That's not true at all. The rules are very, very simple. Only call hooks at the top level. What that means is if we've got a conditional hook that we want to fire, don't put the hook inside the condition. Instead, put the condition inside the hook. The reason for that is that hooks need to execute in the same order with every call to the function. Also, only call hooks from React function components. So this means we can't use hooks in class components, but using hooks and using functions turns out to be much less code than using class components anyway, so maybe that's not such a big deal. And also, we can call hooks from custom hooks. So either from function components or from our custom hooks is where we can call hooks. If those rules are too difficult for you, then React actually ships with an ESLint plugin that will tell you in your IDE whether you're breaking these rules. And that's it. There's no further rules than that. So this is something called wrapper hell. It looks ugly, and it implies a hierarchy in components that often doesn't exist. But what it is the result of wrapping many, many components inside higher order components, which prior to using hooks is one of the popular ways that we would share logic through our application. So this is what one of those higher order components would look like. And that wrapper hell is basically made by these last two lines. So this is just an example of one where we're wrapping the show the location component with our router hire component. And the reason that we do that is because it's going to inject into our props the router properties that we're going to access in our component. So the way that we get that wrapper hell is that we end up having more than just the router that we want to attach to this component. Sometimes we'll want to add with styles, a whole lot of other higher order components, and we start to get that pyramid shaped code. Here we are doing the same thing, but with hooks. So this is an example of a custom hook that ships with React Router, specifically use history and use location. So what we're seeing here is exactly the same as we were before with the higher order component, but instead of needing to inject our props into the component, we can just use the hooks to access that functionality and that logic. So that's what we're doing here when we're using a use history and use location hook at the top, and then in the bottom when we render, we're accessing them. Cool. So also in 2019, I learned or failed to learn Redux twice. Redux was, I had an application that was getting out of control as far as internal state was going. I really wanted to get that under control. I turned to Redux, but for a number of reasons which we'll go through, I twice went, no, I'm not dealing with this level of complexity. I'll just keep pushing all of my state through props and components. Again, in 2019, I ended up having to go to a client where they were using Redux, and so I was forced to bite the bullet, and I just went through with it and learned Redux. Redux actually on its own is very, very simple. It's a single source of truth, which we call the store. State is read-only. We modify that state by dispatching actions, and we change the store via pure function. So functions where if we put the same input in, we'll get the same output, and without side effect. Reducers take the current state and an action to produce new state. So really, it's just three things: store, action, reducer. And you can make great applications that have no user interface with Redux. Here's an example of one. Up the top here, we're having a look at our store. We're calling get state on that store, and it's gonna, we can see there's an object with some beers in it, 10 beers. We're gonna dispatch an action on that store called drink a beer, and this reducer is gonna take that action and that previous state, and it's gonna return our new state, which is state.beers -1. It's pretty simple, and it's quite an elegant way to create like your domain. So let's just npm install Redux, save, and problem solved. Unfortunately, problem not solved. There's more to Redux than just npm i save. We're going to need Redux, which we'll go through in a moment. And then I wish I had knew when I was learning Redux that Redux toolkit was a thing. I did not know. Now I do know. And hopefully if you're on the same path, you'll now know too, thanks to this talk. But also Redux dev tools as well. So let's have a look at what these things are. React Redux, I think, is probably responsible for most of my, or the reason for those 2 times that I dropped React Redux, refused to take on that complexity, and just walked away. Why is that? Let's have a look at the provider and the connect function. This is the provider. Very, very simple. It's pretty much React context, right? Cool. Do it once at the root of your app and forget that it's there. Never look at it again. That's easy. I think this one here is the one that, to the Redux newbie, is a little bit scary. Now, I'm not a Redux newbie anymore. I know what this is all doing, and I use this both in personal projects and commercially in this kind of thing. But certainly it is a little bit alarming, and it gets more alarming than this, which let's jump down that rabbit hole right now, in fact. So what is all of this, and what are we doing with it? So we've got those three easy, simple Redux concepts that we started with, but we need to attach our user interface to it. And what that means is that we need to bind our components to that store such that they can access that state, they can be updated when the state's updated, and it can mutate that state as well based on or by calling actions. So this is what this code is doing. The first one maps state to props. It's returning a slice or a selected piece of the store. So, okay, that's, I guess, simple. This next one here, map dispatch to props, is a little bit more complex, I think. What it's doing is it's creating our actions such that in our, or creating functions that will later call to, that will end up going through to the Redux reducers and whatnot, that will end up mutating our state. So map dispatch to prop is wrapping them all up and binding them to our component. So connect's going to take those two objects that we created above and also wrap them around or bind them to our component. What ends up happening though is it's a little bit more complex than that again. So there's the state that we will make available to our component, but often we don't want to write state like this or these selectors like this. Often what we want to do is, perhaps if we need to do quite complex calculations when we're building this state, or perhaps we want to share the code that we're using to select this state from the store, what we end up doing is using selectors. And there's a library called reselect. We'll end up doing something like this. And this makes sense to me now, but didn't make sense to me when I first looked at Redux. Basically, this is going to let us quite easily share our selectors, and reselect's going to do things like not calculate our selectors again unless the component properties within them are changed and that kind of thing. So it's going to optimize it a bit, but it's a little bit more abstract than what we were looking at before. Just map dispatch to props is a little bit the same. We're going to have to use these things called action creators, and what action creators are functions that return the functions that we'll end up dispatching. And for similar reasons as selectors, we're going to be able to, well, we're going to use this pattern such that we can start sharing these actions around our application without repeating ourselves. So our map dispatch to props that we end up feeding into the connect function ends up looking like this, which again is a lot more abstract than what we first started with. So the result is something like this. And again, this makes a lot of sense to me now, but when I started or failed to start those first two times, this was hard to make the brain want to get to the bottom of what was actually occurring here. So Redux Toolkit, I mentioned, is also something that I wish I knew existed before I learned Redux. It basically gives us some helper functions and whatnot that, had I known beforehand, would have made the journey to learning Redux a little bit easier. Redux Toolkit offers an API with a number of functions which we'll go through now. One of them is configure store. That's going to, interestingly, add to our store by default a piece of middleware called Redux Thunk, and that's going to help us with asynchronous state changes. It's also going to add a function called combine reducers, which turns out to be quite helpful because the Redux store only takes one reducer, so you've got to combine all your separate reducers if you've split them up which you'll want to if you want a manageable application. It also supplies create reducer, which allows us to write reducers that use switch, and it also chucks in immer such that we can feel that we're changing state when really we're not. It also adds create actions, which is a function that helps us reduces the boilerplate on creating those action creators that we saw previously. And also create selector, which is just a re-export of the reselect library. So you don't even need to know about that reselects a thing, because you'll just get it if you installed the Redux toolkit. Additionally, there's create slice, which generates action creators and actions types for us. I haven't personally used that one, and very recently 2 more were added. Create async thunk, which reduces the boilerplate on creating async actions, and additionally create entity adapter, which is a port of ngrx entity. Additionally, with Redux, there comes 2 hooks. So I also did not know about this the first time that I learned Redux. And one of the things that this is quite a big deal for me, because using these 2 hooks actually lets us get away from that connect pattern. So here we are again with that, where we saw that first large connect with map state to props and map dispatch or match actions to props. Here it is again, just using hooks. So here we are calling use selector. That's going to grab that little piece of state that we care about specific to this component. It's also going to manage the subscription to the changes in state for us. And also we're going to use, so we can then just use that beers reference down there in our render method that we return. And also that use dispatch is going to give us access to that directly to the dispatch function, so we can send our action or we can call our action creator directly from this without needing to bind those dispatch props via connect. So that's all I've got for you. I hope that you saw and understood some of the value that hooks give you. Additionally, I hope that if you've looked at Redux before and thought maybe connect was too scary, perhaps you'll use hooks to make it a little bit less scary, and that you can look into the Redux toolkit. Otherwise, thank you for listening. There's my details. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask them now, or outside of this session. Also, you can reach me on the Twitter with that account.
Thank you, Stafford, for your awesome presentation. I hope it was helpful for many people who was watching. And basically, just one quick question pops up here. Like, basically, the question is, in your opinion, what problem React team was trying to solve introducing hooks?
So I think that in my opinion, I think there's 2 things. I think one is writing slightly less code, and I'm not slightly less code, a lot less code. And whilst that might not be their opinion, I think that is one of the best reasons. I don't like writing code. Well, I love writing code, but I like to write as little code as possible to get the same thing done. Additionally, the move from having to have stateful components as class components, like classes, again, classes, if we've been writing object-oriented code for a long time, classes are somewhat simple to understand, but still not as simple as just plain functions. So moving from stateful class components to stateful function or stateful components as functions is a large reduction in complexity. So I'd like to think that latter idea was one of their driving forces.
All right, great. Yeah, thanks for your answer. If any of you have any more questions, just comment on the comment section, and we come back to the questions later. So now I want to thank you, Stafford, again.
Thanks.
So we hang out after the next session in the panel. So in case if there will be any more questions. So I want to give a round of applause for Stafford. Thank you. And we jump into the next speaker. Matt. Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good.
You didn't fall asleep yet?
No, that was a good presentation. So I definitely stayed awake.
Right. So yeah, we now jump into the second speaker, who's Matt, and he is going to be talking today and teaching us like mobile development kind of thing. So he's teach us mobile, like how to use React and with JHipster, and basically how to play around with Ionic, because I think like it's very interesting combination, and it sounds like a very interesting talk. People always wondering like hybrid development versus native mobile development, like what's the pros and cons, and I guess Matt will touch some points of that. So yeah, please welcome Matt.
Thank you. So I actually pre-recorded this because there's a lot of things in the demo that take quite some time to do. So I figured if I pre-recorded it, I could delete those parts out, like the npm install, and then get all the things I wanted to show in here. So this is a pre-recorded video, and obviously you'll see some cuts where I, do things really quickly. So just wanted to warn you about that, and share my screen here. So here we go. Okay, and then get this going. And
welcome to mobile development with
start over there.
Hello, developers, and welcome to mobile development with JHipster, Ionic, and React Native. My name is Matt Raible, and I grew up in the backwoods of Montana with no electricity, no running water, and I had to walk 2 miles to the bus stop every day, and it felt like it was uphill both ways. I live in Denver, Colorado with my beautiful wife Trish, my 2 awesome kids, Abby and Jack. I also have a middle child. His name is Hefe. I bought him off eBay in 2004 and restored him over the next 12 years. Porsche engine, Porsche transmission, he really gets up and goes. I work for a company called Okta. Okta, the word, means a unit of cloud measurement. So if it's an 8 octa day, that means it's very cloudy. 0 octas means nice and sunny. So we're a cloud-based authentication and authorization company. We support OAuth 2, OpenID Connect, and SAML. So if you're looking for some way to authorize your users, look to us. So today I'll talk a little bit about JHipster, show you how to use it, show you how to build a progressive web application with it, and then I'll show you how to use Ionic for JHipster, and then I'll show you how to use JHipster Ignite. And at the end, I'll tell you about what's coming with JHipster. So the first part, we'll be talking about what is JHipster, how to install and use it, how you can use JHipster to develop microservices and use OpenID Connect, and then progressive web applications with JHipster. So JHipster started as just a generator that creates Spring Boot and Angular apps. Well, now it's developed into much more. It's more of like a development platform now, because we generate Docker files, we generate Kubernetes files, we allow you to create microservices. So there's all this other stuff that we do. Not only that, but we support React and Vue too. So JHipster's goals are to create a high-performance or robust Java stack on the server side with Spring Boot. It's a sleek, modern, mobile-first front end with Angular and Bootstrap. Obviously, Angular, right? If you're using React, then that's not Angular. But Angular was our first one, and we try to use Bootstrap for not only Vue, but for React as well. We support a robust microservices architecture with JHipster Registry based on Netflix Eureka and Elastic Stack and Docker. And then we have a powerful workflow to build your application with Webpack and Maven or Gradle. So basically, you don't have to restart your app all the time. It'll just detect when things have changed and restart it for you. So how to use JHipster, npm install -g generator JHipster. Then you'll create a directory and CD into it, and then you'll just run JHipster. We also support microservices, so JHipster registry is your service registry, and then we also have a gateway on the front end. There's also some examples that I have JHipster 6 demo is a quick blog post application that I created, and that has a YouTube tutorial on how to create the whole thing in about 15 minutes. I also created a 21 points health application, and 21 points health is something that I use to monitor my health, just like Actuator monitors Spring Boot's health. 21 points is basically you can get 21 points in a week, and you can get 3 points a day. So you get a point if you eat well. For me, it was low sugar, so I try not to eat sugar. 2, if you exercise, you get a point. And the third one is if you don't drink, you get a point. You can get 21 points in a week. And what I found is if I get above 18 points, typically I'll lose weight, feel really good. If I get 15 points, typically maintain, and lower than that, not so good. And I've even come to the conclusion that if I get lower than 10, especially a couple weeks in a row, I usually get sick. So I stopped blaming it on my kids when I got sick, and now I know it's my fault. So what we're going to do today is actually use that 21 points health system that I put together to create a new app, and then we'll create our mobile apps based on that as well. So, but first, before we get to the demo, I wanted to mention progressive web apps real quick. So progressive web apps have to originate from a secure location, load while offline, and reference a web app manifest. The web app manifest gives it details on how to install it, basically what page to load when it pops up on your mobile device, and icons, things of that sort. Loading offline is done with service workers, and so they can be installed. They look like native apps, distributed through the web, and they're fast. So to enable a PWA in JHipster, after you've generated your app, there's in the index.html this code that needs to be uncommented. So now I'll do a demo of creating a JHipster app, generating entities in that app, and convert the app to be a PWA, and then I'll show you the Lighthouse score afterwards. In Raible Mobile JHipster, that's where all the code that I'm creating today resides. And in here, there's this demo.adoc file. Well, I've loaded that up with my handy ASCII Doctor plugin here. You can see if I toggle it off, it's just raw ASCII Doc. If I toggle it back on, it looks pretty nice. And it shows that there's some prerequisites: Java 8, Node 10, Yarn, and CocoaPods. So I don't have any versions on any of the NPM installs here. And so if you try this in the future, I can't guarantee it works. It should work, but rather than locking down to a certain version, these instructions just assume latest versions of everything. So you start by installing JHipster, which I've already done. npm install generator JHipster, create a new directory, make their mobile JHipster, and then download this 21 points health JDL. JDL stands for JHipster domain language. That's how we know we're hip. We have our own domain language. And you can see in here, it's a monolith. It's going to use a base name of health points. It's going to use OAuth 2 for authentication, Gradle, Elasticsearch. We're going to use React just for the heck of it, just to show that whatever you have on the JHipster side doesn't affect what you have on the mobile side. And then we have entities for points, blood pressure, and weight. So blood pressure, just systolic, diastolic, and the timestamp when you recorded it. The weight is just the timestamp in your weight. And then the points, right? You get a point for exercising, you get a point for eating well, you get a point for alcohol. So I'm just using integers for those rather than Booleans because, you could change your system someday. And then preferences, your weekly goal and the weight units. And then we have some enums in there. And then relationships, one-to-one, preferences to user, and then many-to-one for your blood pressure to user, your weight to user, and your points to user. So they're all, pointing to those users. And then pagination rules at the bottom there. So back to our instructions. We'll create a backend directory and run import JDL from it, and that'll basically create the whole app for us. So I've already done that just to speed things up a bit. And you can see if we scroll back to the beginning here, that I start with JHipster version, and you'll see we're using the latest version, at least as of today, 6.8.0. And then I run a wget to get that 21 points.jh right there. And then take is a command that does make dir and CDs into it. So it's kind of convenient. I created that backend directory. I ran JHipster import JDL, 21 points, and then it goes through and creates everything for me. Creates a whole bunch of Java files and a bunch of TypeScript files in the front end. It also creates database schema files. So when you start up your database, it creates the tables for you, and it uses Liquibase for that. So you can see it took 1 minute and 26 seconds to run. So I'm going to put this on the right here, put this on the left, and now I'm just going to start it. All right, Gradle W. Oh, I have to start keycloak first. So docker compose source main docker keycloak up -d. Oh. Well, I have a shortcut for it. It's JH keycloak up. So now everything's up and running. I can go ahead and open it up. Do a login. It redirects us to keycloak. I'm going to do admin. We're logged in. You can see there's our entities, right? Blood pressure. And it uses Staker.js to create a bunch of fake data. So there is some data in there. Weight, we can go to the administration, see the metrics, timings for certain requests. And there's also health in here and even Swagger. So if you just want your front-end developers to be able to see the Swagger docs, you can certainly do that. And then, of course, we could switch to Spanish there and back to English. There's, on this page, points. If you were to create new points, you'd see that you could enter any value. So I want to fix that and make it so we can actually just use checkboxes, right? You either did it or you didn't. So let's open up IntelliJ and make those changes. So now if we look for points update TSX. So if we scroll into the code here, you'll see that we have these points alcohol, points meals, and points exercise. So let's change those to checkboxes. So that was my live templates. Now it's checkboxes. Well, we've already built our app, so it's not actually going to see those changes. But we can use npm start, and then it'll use browser sync, load up the changes, and if we make any UI changes, it'll automatically refresh the browser, and it'll proxy all the requests to the backend. So now you can see we're logged in. If we go to points and create new point, you can see now we've got checkboxes, right? So today's been a good day. We'll go ahead and assign that to the admin user. You can save it. You can see it down at the bottom, and then you could delete it. So that's all working. Let's see, anything else we need to do? Turning off fakers. So I'm going to close down this one, and then I don't want to use Faker because with the mobile apps, it shows so much data. It's kind of nicer just to have, one record show up and everything's a bit cleaner. So that's why I'm turning off Faker. So if you go into source main resources, config, application, dev.yml and search for Faker, you'll see it's one of the liquid-based contexts. So you can just remove it and then there won't be fake data that's entered. So you do need to remove it from build h2db because that's the database. And then if you restart it, then you'll have a version that doesn't have fake data in it. So I could continue and do the Ionic and React Native part of it, but let's go into the presentation real quick. So I didn't convert it to be a PWA, but I did it in a previous project, and so I can show you the score that it will get. But again, all you need to do is change that index.html file and actually comment out the service worker part, and then you need to run it with a prod profile so it actually does the service worker copying into the final directory. So the test coverage is very good on JHipster project by default. You can see here we have 66%, and down at the bottom there, and 0 bugs. So that's all looking pretty good. And then the Lighthouse report on 680, when I started everything using prod and uncommented that service worker, you can see 100 performance, 100 accessibility, and it certifies as a progressible map. So looks pretty good. So part 2, Ionic for JHipster. First of all, what is Ionic? Well, Ionic was created by the Ionic company. So that's why they call it the Ionic framework. It was one of those things where they started a project in a company, they called them the same thing, and then they needed some distinction. So the Ionic framework is what people can use to develop PWAs or hybrid mobile apps using web technologies. It started out as just an AngularJS thing, and then they adopted Angular, and now they support React and Vue as well. So you can go to Ionic framework to learn more about it. They also created Stencil, which allows you to create web components. And then they also have a PWA toolkit. So they're definitely web focused. They're very into the web, embracing the web, and really great people that work there. So why would I want to create an Ionic app when I can do a PWA? Well, I first created 21 points health for the JHipster mini book that I wrote. What I learned is it was very frustrating to use in the beginning because, first of all, it didn't even have to remember me. So I had to log in each time. That was a pain. And then just the transitions and the animations and kind of how it works just isn't quite as good as you get in a lot of native apps. So I want to develop the best user experience. And so native apps, are painful to distribute, but sometimes they have a better experience. So that's why I wanted to explore Ionic. I created the Ionic module for JHipster, and you can install it. You have to install the Ionic CLI as well because it uses that. And then generator JHipster, Ionic, and Yeoman. That's Yo. So Yo, create me an Ionic app. Right? You run it with yo jhipster-ionic, and then you'll profit. So in this demo, I'll create an app with Ionic for J. That's what I like to call it. In Java, there's log for J, and there's other for J, so I thought it was kind of cute. We'll generate some entities in that app, the same entities that we have in the main JHipster app. We'll modify the UI to be a bit friendlier, and then we'll run it on iOS. All right, so I have it down here. I started it up beforehand. And you can see, if you scroll all the way to the top, I started by installing generator JHipster Ionic, Ionic CLI, and Yeoman. And you'll see these are the versions I'm using. So I can't guarantee this will work if you're using other versions, but this works today. And you run yo JHipster Ionic. And it goes ahead and prompts you for the name of your app and then where your JHipster backend is located. So since we just called it backend, that's what I did. And it reads from your JHipster configuration and knows, for instance, what authentication mechanism you're using, either JWT or OAuth, and then creates an app accordingly. So down here at the bottom, I can put this on the right now. We started by renaming health points to Ionic, right, which I did right here, and then CD into it. And so now if I run Ionic serve, we can see the app up and running. Now, if we were to log in, it redirected us to Keycloak, but it happened so fast you didn't even notice. So if I were to, say, do it in an incognito window, and then maybe even down at the bottom here, turning this into an iPhone, you can see kind of more what it looks like. So localhost 8100, sign in, redirects us to Keycloak, comes back, and we're logged in. Right, and then if we click on entities, we don't have any yet, so we can go here, close this one down since it's the same as this one over here, and we can do Ionic for J, which is a shortcut to yo JHipster Ionic, and import JDL and those 21 points. Let's try JHipster Ionic, import JDL, 21 points. Okay. So Ionic 4J doesn't always work, but the main one does, so that's good. It detects that we have some new files in there, recompiles everything, and so if we go to Ionic here and sign in, you'll see there's all of our points. So we can see there's no blood pressures, right, because there isn't any on the back end, but if we were to go here and go into, let's say, just the blood pressure, create a new one, and say, 120/70, this is for our admin. We save it, we come back here, go to blood pressure, there it is, right? So you can see they're kind of talking to each other. So now if we want to make the same change where we go into points and we make these into toggles, we have to do a bit of work. So we have to change the points update to use ion toggle, and then points update.ts to use booleans. I'll open this up in IntelliJ, and then I'll find that points update.html, close this one, and I said we had to change these to toggle, so ion toggle instead of an input. And then slot equals start. And then remove this position here. All right. So now points update. We need to change, first of all, in the save method, add these to convert it. All right, from booleans to ints, and then in the same file, this is new, then set some defaults, and then we'll run everything in iOS simulator. So Ionic, Cordova, prepare, iOS. And then back here, if we were to log in, you can see that if we go to our points, now they're toggled. So we got one toggling, the others aren't. So let's look back at our HTML. Oh, we got to change these to toggles. Now you can see they're toggle, right? Pretty slick, eh? And if we look at it on a mobile device, looks much better, right? And you can even add like a user to it, hit OK, and save it. Creates all the points successfully. So now it's prompting me, do I want to integrate my app with Cordova? Yep. And then iOS is not installed. Do I want to install it? Yep. So you can see that took about 5 minutes to run, so kind of a lengthy process. Once you have it compiled and ready to go, run open platforms, iOS, my app.xc workspace. That opens it up in Xcode. And then you can click on my app at the top there, click play. And then once your app is up and running, you can click sign in. It'll redirect you to Keycloak to log in. So you can do admin. Come back, see your entities, go to points, and we see that point is there. So we could edit it and say, I didn't eat well today, and change that. If we were to go back here and refresh, we're going to sign in. you can see the changes made there as well. So it's working on iOS, and you know, that's Ionic. So works pretty well. Now back to the presentation. I wrote a blog post about this that shows not exactly the same demo, but it shows you how to add a photo gallery. I put old Hefe up there, so you can read that and see how that was all created as well. And now we'll dig into Ignite JHipster. So first of all, what is React Native? React Native is similar to Ionic, except it actually uses the native components. So you'll write it in React, but it's kind of a bridge, and then the native components are used. So Ignite CLI is similar to JHipster, but for React Native apps. So it's from Infinite Red. You can see up there in the top right, infinite.red/ignite. Allows you to easily spin up a new React Native app, saves an average of 2 weeks, has an ever-expanding list of boilerplates and plugins, and JHipster is one of those boilerplates, and it works on Mac OS, Windows, and Linux. So to install Ignite JHipster, which is this boilerplate for Ignite CLI, npm install -g Ignite CLI, and then Ignite JHipster. You'll create a new app with it, and then have fun. All right, so in this demo, I'll create an app with Ignite JHipster, generate entities in the app, modify the UI to be friendlier, and run it on Android. So back to our instructions here. You'll see we start by installing Ignite CLI and Ignite JHipster, and then create a Health Points React Native app. So I've already done some of these steps. You can see I installed Ignite CLI and Ignite JHipster, and these are the versions that are used. And then I went ahead and Ignite new Health Points and used that boilerplate for Ignite JHipster. And this does take quite a while to run. So you can see, even though there's not much output, it did take 4 minutes and 30 seconds. So then I moved it to React Native, and now I'm in that directory. So we'll put this on the right here. And the first thing we need to do is just, we could run iOS, but I said I was going to do this on Android. So first of all, let's go ahead and shortcut this and get our entities generated. So this is 21 points, right? Ignite generate, import JDL, and then the name of your JDL file. So we have all those, and then what I'll do is I'll do npm run Android. So while it's starting, we do need to run some ADB reverse commands so it can talk to not only our JHipster API, but also Keycloak. So we don't want that Metro bundle. That's just going to cause problems. So back here, that's where we'll do the ADB reverse. Okay, so everything's up and running now. If we were to go and click on login, come on, baby. Maybe it's because this reverse didn't happen soon enough. Do RR to reload. Then try it. Now it's working. So we can do admin. And now if we were to go to our entities, see if we look at points, try that one. That's the one we entered in, right? That's the 101. So this one has text box just like Ionic did. So let's change those to Boolean. So open this up in IntelliJ, and we'll go to the points entity edit screen. Points entity. There we go. And we need to change these to Booleans, right, instead of being numbers. And that'll change the forms, so it handles it, but then we have to change entity to form value. We have to change that, so when it comes from our database, it converts it to Booleans. So exercise, meals, and alcohol. By default, it's 0, and if it exists, then it's 1. And then form value to entity. So this is converting the form to send it back to the server. And then we can add some default values. You can see it says if it has an ID, then go ahead and say it's not a new entity. But we're going to say if it doesn't have an ID, then go ahead and create a date and set everything to true, because we want everyone, be ready to have a good day. So now you can see it's already refreshed and it's got that information in there. So if we were to toggle off the exercise, for instance, and save it, save successfully, go back and look at our Ionic app here, or even our simulator app. Oh, it's not running. Well, we got it here, right? Health points. Go to points. And this one's timed out as well. So we log in again. Then go to points. You can see it's taken out that exercise line. So now everything's working there. The last thing I wanted to show you is how to use Okta instead of Keycloak. you'll create a web application on Okta. You go to developer.okta.com and you'll click create free account. Then you'll put in your information and then you'll get an account, and then you can log into that account and create what's called a web application. And then you'll use this URL, this is for Spring Security, as your login redirect URI. And then you'll set a log out redirect URI localhost 8080. So then you need to set up a groups claim, and you need to configure an environment file that has this information in it. So I've already done all that just because, watching that's kind of boring. So if we look at okta.env, you can see these are my settings, and I've also created a native app. So if we were to source okta.env, this is JHipster, right? Then we can run Gradle and start it up. And since we've set those environment variables, Spring Boot knows to override its default settings. So now if we were to sign in, let me do it in an incognito window just to make sure. Localhost 8080 and click sign in. Now it'll redirect us to Okta. And we can log in with that user, right? So that all works. We could also change our React Native application, just because that's one of the easier ones to modify. It's still up and running in login.sagas.js to use the generated client ID. So, and we had it running in IntelliJ, so we can go here and look for login.sagas. And basically there's a client ID in here, right here. And instead of getting it from JHipster, we want to have a more secure one from Okta. So now, if I was to go back to React Native and RR to refresh it and go to login. Nope. Oh, there we go. So now, we go to login. It all works, right? And we can see our entities, and we can talk to JHipster. So lastly, JHipster roadmap. Today you learned, first of all, that JHipster is a project for generating backend applications and front-end applications all on the same platform. You can also use Ionic, Ignite JHipster, and Okta with it. And next for JHipster, we have Micronaut and Quarkus blueprints in the works, so people are working hard on those. We also have .NET and Node.js blueprints. That basically means that you can replace the whole backend with those different frameworks. And if you like Spring Boot, of course, you can use the default one, and there's even Kotlin support if you want to use Kotlin instead of Java. There's full reactive support with Webflux and Spring Cloud Gateway. Right now, that's in JHipster 6.8.0. Personally, I'm interested in adding GraphQL and micro front-end support. So I don't know if that'll happen, but I got some time on my hands nowadays, so maybe it will. So my action to you is to try JHipster, learn more about PWAs, try Ionic for JHipster, try Ignite JHipster if you're interested in React Native, and report any issues you find. If you have questions, please post them on Stack Overflow and just tag it with JHipster, and the whole team will get notifications. We post a ton of blog posts on our developer blog at Okta. You can also follow my team on Twitter. And the source code for everything we did today is at mobile.jhipster. Thank you for coming. You can find me on raibledesigns.com. You can find me on Twitter. My direct messages are wide open. This presentation I'll upload in the next couple of days to SpeakerDeck. And then you can find most of the other code that I do on the Okta Developer GitHub. May the auth be with you.
All right, great, many thanks for awesome presentation. And let's jump quickly for a couple of questions. Let's pick this one. So the question is, speaking about hybrid versus native versus PWA approach, which one would you recommend for some particular case?
So I think native apps are particularly handy when you have to do something like gaming or something that's computationally intensive. So if you have a lot of things going on the screen, then you might just want to hunker down and write it with the native framework or language that is for that device. PWAs work great when you have a mobile site and you want to optimize it and make it so it works better on mobile devices. So if you have any sort of single page application, it becomes a PWA pretty easily. And then the native approach is kind of if you have a bunch of web developers, you don't want to hire iOS developers or Android developers, and you still want to have a mobile app, then that approach works really nice. And I really like Ionic because it has a way that you can basically develop it in the browser the whole time and then just package it up for the actual mobile device. And React Native is good because they have an easy way to refresh the code and you saw at one point it automatically does it for you. So they both have better experiences. Ionic actually, you have to build it and then build it for your mobile device. So that can take a while, and that's why you tend to do it in your browser more.
All right. Thanks for the answer. So guys, if anyone have any more questions, just put them in the comment sections. And now we jump into panel discussion. Stafford, welcome back.
Hello.
So I guess there is one more question for you from Hesam Alvi. So that's the question. What are some resources you recommend to learn about hooks?
I think that video that I mentioned in my talk is one of the best resources, actually. Like it's an hour and a half long. If you put it on double speed, it's like, what, 45 minutes long, and it goes over like 98%. Like it was done at I think at a conference in October in 2018, and like just prior to React hooks being released in February the following year, and the API I don't think changed much, if at all, since that video. So do you know what? I just posted the link to the, oh, where's my mouse? I just posted, I don't know, can you post that link in the comments, Aliaksei? The one I just put a link in the only chat. Yeah, so that's the link directly to the video. But otherwise, if you just Google like React YouTube, React hooks YouTube, it'll be like the second or third result, and it's about an hour and a half long. And the name of it is React Today and Tomorrow and 90% Cleaner. So I recommend just watching that video for 45 minutes on double speed, and then you'll be a pro.
Right. Okay, let's jump to some questions to Matt. Vasil Baradak asking this one. Who are JHipster main target market? ? Corporations like banks or freelance developers?
So it's used by a lot of different folks. If you go to jhipster.tech and scroll down to the bottom, there's like 350 companies that have told us that they're using it. So there's everyone from banks to, even small people. We have a great story about this couple in Venezuela that used JHipster and even the Ionic module to develop their whole business. And they were doing consulting around web design and really helped them out a whole lot. And they were able to rescue their business. So there's all different kinds. What I see a lot is just Java developers that don't want to write front-end code, right? So they're like, hey, if I can actually generate it, that's cool. We've seen so much interest from other communities that now we have, a Node.js backend that uses Nest.js and the Vue front end and a React front end. And there's about 25 people on the project. So it's quite a bit of work that's going on there.
Right. So Vasily, I hope it's answered your question. Next question for Matt, in your opinion, what benefit does Ionic have over React Native? Considering it's running WebView compared to native.
So I think the biggest advantage right now is that you can just develop PWA with it. You don't have to put it on a phone. You don't have to package it up as a native application. I do believe there's some work that's been done with React Native to make the same thing possible. So a lot of it's just like, which one do you like better? Right? Do you like, React? Then React Native probably works, but now we got Ionic with React support too. So personally, I would prefer to use my browser and use Chrome developer tools to do any debugging or modification of the app and see what's wrong rather than trying to wrestle with, one of the emulators. So I'm sure you can do both. You could create a great app with both. A lot of times it matters what people they're doing the work more than the technology.
Right, and just to follow up on that, do you have any opinions on Flutter? The Google Flutter?
We've seen a little bit of demand for Flutter, so we get all kinds of requests at Okta, right? People trying to integrate with our services, and in Flutter, we haven't seen enough interest where we've actually written our own SDK for it, so you can talk to our APIs. But at the same time, we haven't done it for Ionic either. The only one that we've done it for is React Native. Ionic, the integration that I've done for JHipster and just bare bones Ionic is to use Ionic AppAuth. And AppAuth is actually a standard out there project that does OIDC for most mobile apps. And I know there's an OIDC Flutter app, but I think OIDC is written in Dart, or not OIDC, but Flutter is written in Dart, and you program in Dart, and that's just not that attractive to me. But there's a lot of people that like it, you know.
And just like speaking about the future, right? So if you think about, like, I don't want to bring WebAssembly into play, right? But yeah, if we think about the future, like say next couple of years, like, okay, let's think about 1 year, right? We don't want to think like 5 years. It's too hard. Like 1 year, 2 years ahead, like what do you think, like what would be most on demand? Which approach?
I would always bet on the web. Right? And so, I mean, it's interesting that Google has Angular and Android and Flutter. Right, you can tell they're a big company with lots of money because they have all these different ways of doing it, and they're all allowed to coexist. So I think a lot of it's just, you know, as a developer, there's certain things that work for you, and there's certain things that don't. So if one appeals to you, then go ahead and do it. And you know, with the work that we've done with JHipster, you could just create an app and prototype it in an hour, and then go into the code and be like, oh, this is Redux. I got to learn Redux to really be productive here. But you know, it's you know, everyone has different personalities, especially developers.
Right. Okay, thanks for your answers. If anyone still have a question, please go ahead and comment it in the comment section. Stafford, I have a question for you. Like so first of all, thanks for a great talk. And basically my question is about React hooks. Like what do you think, again, like thinking about the future, right? So as right now, it's like not compulsory, right? So it's like opt-in kind of thing, but will it became like default at some point, or like what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, again, I think it comes down to the difference between having to write stateful components as classes and versus that via functions. With the class approach and specifically those lifecycle methods, there's a lot of to start with dupe code, but then because we refactor it, just like a lot of plumbing and that kind of thing with class components, using functions or using hooks where by default there's no real reason for any of that plumbing. It definitely makes sense to me to go all in with hooks. I recently worked for a client where they started building a greenfield project December of last year, and they started with hooks, and a project that they had just finished, they had not used hooks, and it was just so much quicker to use hooks with the new project that every time you had to go back to the old or the project that was completed just prior to the new project and use class components, it was really super annoying because now I have to look here and I have to look there and I have to change this and that. When with a hook, it's just like there's so much less code. So I don't think that that idea of writing less code can be trumpeted loud enough. So I think it will be all in. Like I'd love to meet somebody who, and I know there are some actually. I know there's some people that have some different ideas about how testing with hooks works, and that they might not like hooks because of the way that they test them. I'm not on that page right now. I'm like because I have to write so little code with hooks already, I'm going to prefer that. And any of the gaps that I need to plug as far as as testing goes, I'm just gonna do it because less code is the best code, right? And
say you have some application written, I don't know, 2 years ago without React hooks, mid-size application. So if you decide to go all in using React hooks, like are you looking to completely rewrite, or like is there any best practices to turn it into the hooks?
So that's a really good question, and I did it the wrong way one time. I had an application that when I first learned hooks, I had an application that was obviously not using hooks, and I converted the whole thing to use hooks. There was really no point in doing that. The application worked. It was, I don't know, it added to my learning, I guess, but very repetitive and it was pointless. Like if what you've got is not broke, don't fix it. That was for a personal project. I certainly wouldn't do it for a client. There's not enough money to just go randomly refactoring things without having to do regression tests and that kind of stuff for a business. But I think that so even if you've got an existing so that's what my previous example, where there was a project that had just completed and it hadn't used hooks. A decision can be made with every change that you then need to make to that legacy project, where, I mean, I'm saying legacy, but like I'm talking like 3 months ago. And a decision can be made where, okay, I've got a class component right now. I need to make a change. If it's a small tweak to that component, like if it's a tiny cosmetic tweak or something, I'm not going to convert that component to use hooks. Because for the component, it will be pretty much a rewrite. But I can, if I needed to add more logic to it or add another child component or something, I could write that component using hooks, the new component using hooks, and then just reference that component within my existing class component. So it's very flexible. You don't have to go all in. And I mean, if you had to go all in, nobody would do it, right? Like that would be a major issue. Like it would, but for new projects only, I don't really like that approach. I like to do things step by step, gradual change and that kind of thing. So you can definitely choose pieces and just move them to hooks.
Right, and it seems like React hooks is the kind of different way of syncing, right? So it's like you approach components in a different way you've done before, right?
I don't know that you do. I think that there's less cognitive load required to think about hooks than about the life cycle in class components. That said, like if you know class components back to front because you've been using them for, I don't know, forever, then sure, there's going to be some cognitive loads understanding how hooks are slightly different to what you are very familiar with. But certainly, I don't know. I think it just makes sense. Like even small things like getting rid of constructors and that kind of thing, and having to call the super and the constructor and that kind of thing. Like just small things like that make like it's just that little bit of brain power that I don't any longer have to spend, and I'm always going to choose that over having to spend it.
All right. Okay. Great. So there is some more questions coming in. Arjun asking Matt, the question for Matt. How does Okta compare to Auth0? That's a good one.
Yeah, they're both very similar. They're, OpenID Connect providers or OAuth providers. And the beauty of it is if it's done well, then you as a developer just have to use a library that supports OIDC, right? You put in your issuer, you put in your client ID, and you could switch from Okta to OAuth or to GitHub or someone else. So we have, if you sign up for a developer account, you get 1,000 active monthly users for free. So if you start getting 2,000 users a month, then maybe I got to pay $20. But yeah, they're very similar. They're both OAuth providers.
Right. Okay, great. So looks like we're done with the questions. Yeah, guys, anything else you want to talk today? I'm talking to panel, to Matt and Stafford. Anything
there was
you
a
want to share?
There was a question about links in the presentation. I did post that to the YouTube chat, so hopefully that'll come through at some point. And if you download the PDF for the presentation, you should be able to click on any links in there.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, guys, we're going to be tweeting and sharing links. I put them in under the video description as well. So you got all the links. Yeah, you will be fine with that. No worries. Okay, one more question coming in. Question to Stafford. Are your games available somewhere? Have you tried compact development games using it?
Do you know, actually, it's actually yes to both of those questions. The first is if you go to staffordwilliams.com and click on apps, and scroll down, there's some pictures of some very stupid games, and you can click on those and mess around with them. One of my problems when I was making games is that I didn't really want to make games that were interesting to others. I wanted to make games that were interesting to me, and that's not a great way to make or to build a business. It's not a very good business model. So yes, those games are there, but the second question, which is developing games using React, I have a site called digitalicebreakers.com, and that's linked from that app section of my website as well. And what that is a kind of like a platform where a person presents their screen and the audience members shine their phone at a QR code and they all join into the session. And it was previously, and so that, and when they join in, there's a number of group games on there, and one of them is Pong. And the idea with that Pong game is that the audience members are split into two teams, and each member of each team controls only a percentage of the speed of their bat. And so people have to the teams have to work together to solve that problem. Now that platform is in fact written in React. It's both React and PXJS for the rendering. So it's quite easy, I think, to use React to have like your HTML components or your UI components. And then when you need to switch to something that's a little bit more animated and that kind of stuff, use the renderer, which PXJS gives you. And also with that digitalicebreakers.com, I'm about to make that open source. So the only reason it's not now is because I was very naughty and there's keys and stuff in the repo and that kind of thing. So once I've pulled those keys out of there, I'll make it open source. I intend to doing that over the next few days. Then you can go and have a look at how I've used both React and PXJS in that project.
What game you enjoy develop the most? Like one of those, like which you like? You said you
like in my life, or specifically
you said you develop games for yourself, not like for the public, right? So which one was the best game for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, every time I'm building a game, like that game is like the reason I'm building it at that time is because this is the game that's gonna like make me happy.
So what's the game? Like, what's the particular? Is there any particular one? Like, is there a name for this game?
Well, it's whatever one I'm building at the time.
Right. Okay.
And then unfortunately, once it's built, I'm like, oh, actually, it's shit. I don't like it anymore. And I'll think of another one to build, and that will be the new apple of my eye.
Okay. Nice. There is one more question to Matt. Is JHipster broadly adopted inside Okta?
So at Okta, we have about 2,000 employees, and I think about 500 of those are engineers. And Spring Boot, which JHipster uses, is used to power a lot of our architecture inside the company. But the front end itself, no, we don't use JHipster for that. But the reason that I like it is because, as you can see in my demo, like all you have to do is change like 3 environment variables, and you're switching from Keycloak to Okta. You could also switch to another OAuth provider, right, by just changing those environment variables. So it's great for me to, demo. And I don't think it's used that much inside Okta, though.
Right. Okay, great. Seems like we're finishing with the questions by now. No more questions. So people here saying, hey, thanks guys for your talk. So yeah, I mean, thanks a lot for joining us today. Thanks for your time preparing the talks. It's been awesome. So yeah, like thumbs up. Anyone who watching, subscribe for the channel. Join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. Sydney time for another Frontend Tech show. And yeah, thanks for being with us. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for putting it together. See ya.
Bye.